It is a universally acknowledged truth that when a housemaid discovers a dead man in a library, she must first scream and then drop the tea tray. Such was the custom at Greythorn Hall, which prided itself on continuity and the sort of hereditary dullness that encouraged afternoon sherry, good preserves, and strictly Anglican ghost stories. On this particular Tuesday morning, the sort of slate-coloured morning that draped the Yorkshire dales in damp reluctance, Miss Tottle, the second parlour-maid, did indeed scream, and would undoubtedly have shattered a Crown Derby teacup had the tray not been of the silver variety, with a raised lip and the family crest, 2 rampant geese, etched upon it. As it was, the tray merely skidded into the hearth and came to rest with a dignified rattle beside the late Canon Bracknell. The canon lay upon the oriental rug, looking almost offended by the circumstances, as though death had caught him during an especially satisfying sermon. His fingers curled faintly about the corner of a small brass-bound tin, decorated, curiously, with an image of St. Sebastian, and the edge of his clerical collar bore a smudge of something that looked, at first glance, like soot, or chocolate, or, well, yes, blood. By the time Lord Peter Wimsey arrived, 27 hours later, delayed by a tedious dinner at the Athenaeum and a fog that refused to behave, meteorologically, the place had settled into that particular hush known only to houses with dead clergymen in them. It was the kind of hush that smelt faintly of furniture polish and moral disappointment. Wimsey entered the front hall at a distracted angle, a copy of the Times Literary Supplement under one arm and a silver-tipped cane under the other. "Curious business," he murmured to Bunter, his valet, who had preceded him with the effortless stealth of a man who believed footfalls were vulgar. "Indeed, my lord. The late canon was said to be in excellent health. Died in his study, mid-letter, they say. Locked room, window bolted, fire out, kettle warm, and if I may say so, a rather undisturbed biscuit tin." Wimsey paused. "The biscuit tin was locked, you say?" "So the housekeeper insists." "Good heavens, Bunter, how very un-English. Do we lock away our bourbons now for fear of predatory vicars?" Bunter allowed himself a brief sigh through the nose. "I believe it was a family heirloom, my lord." "Georgian, silver-plated." "Well, that's worse," said Wimsey. "Now we're mixing theology and confectionery with vulgar materialism." No wonder the man died. He adjusted his pince-nez and looked about the hallway, which was lined with sepia photographs of grim-eyed Bracknells. One particularly angular ancestor had the look of a man who disapproved violently of sugar. "Take a note, Bunter," he said suddenly. "Yes, my lord." "Find out when the biscuit tin was last opened. Note who had the key. Ascertain what kind of biscuits they were." "We may be dealing with ginger nuts, and that could change everything. Very good, my lord." Wimsey moved to the library, stepping neatly around the floral rug, where the canon's chalked outline now lay like a disappointed angel. He surveyed the scene with interest. The desk was a monument to quiet efficiency. Pens aligned, a half-written letter to the diocesan council, a fountain pen uncapped and dry. A single sheet of blotting paper bore the impression of the word regrettable. A tiny paperweight in the shape of a weeping cherub perched beside an inkwell like a child denied pudding. "I say," Wimsey said aloud, "the old boy looks positively stifled by decency. Pity." He wandered over to the sideboard where the locked biscuit tin now sat, its saintly motif looking, under the circumstances, more accusatory than devotional. "I wonder," Wimsey murmured, removing a glove, "whether we ought to be more concerned that someone thought to lock away the biscuits before reporting the body." Behind him, Bunter made the faintest clearing of the throat, his equivalent of a bugle blast. "The police report suggests the tin had been secured the night prior, my lord." The canon was known to snack late. "Yes, but was he known to tidy up after dying?" "No, my lord." "Then we are, I fear, at the beginning of something extremely tiresome." From the hallway came the soft shuffle of heavy feet. Constable Tegg, with the dignified clumsiness of a man who disliked being around the gentry, but disliked murder more. Behind him, Miss Tottle sniffled dramatically into a lace-edged handkerchief that looked, Whimsy thought, far too decorative to belong to a working woman. "No one saw anyone," Tegg said, his tone rich with Yorkshire gloom. "Servants was in bed. Housekeeper says the canon was settled for the night by 10. "And yet," said Whimsy, staring at the biscuit tin, "he somehow unsettled himself rather fatally." How profoundly inconvenient, he turned back to the assembled faces, all looking either mournful or mildly resentful. "Do tell me, Miss Tottle," he said in a tone of urbane encouragement, "when you brought in the tea-tray that morning, what was it that made you scream?" She blinked. "Why, sir, he were dead, weren't he?" "Quite so. But surely you didn't know he was dead until you approached." I saw his eyes, sir. They were all glassy. Staring up like he'd seen a ghost, Whimsy allowed himself a faint smile. "Ghosts, Miss Tottle," he said lightly, "rarely arrange biscuit tins quite so tidily. Tell me, was the fire lit when you entered?" She hesitated. "No, sir." Cold, but the coals were white, like it had gone out not long before. Whimsy nodded as though satisfied by something wholly inadequate. Then, with sudden briskness, he turned to Tegg. "My dear constable, might I trouble you for the key to the canon's desk, drawers, the guest register from the previous fortnight, and, if possible, a list of local tradesmen known to deliver at inconvenient hours?" Tegg blinked. "Tradesmen, my lord?" "Well, yes. Somebody, after all, must have brought the biscuits." And with that, Lord Peter Whimsy smiled faintly, extracted a cherrywood pipe from his coat pocket, and began humming a rather bawdy madrigal about a baker's daughter and a dishonest priest. The canon, meanwhile, remained quite perfectly dead. Bunter, with his customary precision, had already laid claim to a quiet corner of the library and was now engaged in a silent and thorough inventory of the canon's writing desk, his gloved hands moving with the studied reverence of a man dismantling a bomb rather than a clergyman's drawer of receipts and ecclesiastical minutiae. Whimsy, seated in a sagging leather armchair beneath the stern gaze of Bishop Bracknell, died. 1819, according to the brass plate beneath the portrait, allowed his gaze to wander to the biscuit tin once more. There was something aesthetically repellent in the arrangement. A biscuit tin too pointedly placed, its devotional figure staring heavenwards as though in protest. Whimsy found the whole affair just a little too arranged. It was one thing to expire in mid-letter, quite another to do so with one's fingers still resting politely beside the symbol of one's late-night indulgence. "And yet," he murmured, almost to himself, "if one intended to do away with a clergyman, why the biscuit tin? Why not a whiskey decanter, or a prayer book, or, heaven help us, a poisoned page of Leviticus?" Bunter, not pausing in his work, replied, "The letter, my lord. Might it be significant? Possibly. Canon Bracknell was in the midst of writing it when he died. The last word was regrettable. But regrettable to whom? He rose then and paced softly to the desk. The letter in question was addressed with ecclesiastical severity to the Right Reverend Cyril Haslam, Bishop of North East Minster, a man whom Whimsy knew only by reputation as a scholar of tedious virtue and nervous digestion. The unfinished missive read, "My Lord Bishop, it is with no small measure of reluctance that I must bring to your attention a matter most regrettable." The pen had trailed off there, the ink pooling faintly at the edge of the page, like the last thought of a man who had grown suddenly too tired to continue. "Bunter, would you agree," Whimsy said, "that a man about to confess a regrettable matter to his bishop is unlikely to interrupt the effort to unlock a biscuit tin?" "Indeed, my lord. Unless the biscuits were intended as a form of atonement." "Ah. A penitential ginger snap." There was a shuffle in the hall, and Constable Tegg reappeared with his usual reluctance, bearing a small box of papers and what appeared to be the canon's personal appointment diary. "Beg pardon, my lord." Miss Frigg, the housekeeper, found this drawer key. She says it's the only one what fits that lower drawer. Whimsy accepted the key with a nod. "And the tradesman?" Tegg looked aggrieved. "2 deliveries regular each week. Grocer from Lower Marsh brings tinned goods, teas and such like. And once a week there's a parcel from Pickering's, the specialty bakery in the village. Posher biscuits. Excellent. And yesterday's delivery? Delivered Monday morning, just before noon. Housekeeper signed for it. Tell me, Constable, was the canon in the habit of sharing his biscuits?" "Couldn't say, my lord." "But Miss Frigg tells me he always kept that tin locked. She says he once boxed a curate round the ear for helping himself, a theological stance I can admire," said Whimsy dryly. "Was the tin still locked when you arrived?" "Aye. Miss Tottle tried to open it for the police, but it was shut fast. We didn't force it, figured it weren't relevant. Indeed. The presence of a locked tin beside a dead man must naturally be dismissed. And yet I confess I find its presence peculiarly insistent." He took the key and moved to the desk, fitting it into the lower drawer. It turned with a soft, reluctant squeal of old iron, and revealed a neat row of envelopes, a small account book, and a bundle of receipts, each tied with blue ribbon. Bunter glanced over his shoulder. "What do you expect to find, my lord?" "Oh, something frightfully dull. Dullness, Bunter, is the mother of most murders. Excitement inspires poetry. It's boredom that gets one killed." The receipts told a familiar story. A small household, a modest parish budget, and the canon's personal indulgences, an annual subscription to the Church Times, a set of new cassocks, and, curiously, weekly orders from Pickering's bakery. Each entry was scrupulously recorded, signed by the housekeeper, and cross-referenced with the canon's own fastidious notations. Whimsy frowned. 3 weeks ago, he said, tapping the page. The order changed. Before then, almond shortbread, Eccles cakes, ginger thins. Then, quite suddenly, macaroons and chocolate-dipped Florentines. Not the sort of transition one makes lightly. The canon was a high Anglican. He wouldn't have changed biscuit theology without cause. Bunter, peering closer, murmured, "That was also the week the curate resigned." "Was it indeed?" Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Tell me more." "Mr. Rowntree, age 29, ordained 3 years, posted here last spring. Sudden departure 3 weeks ago. Letter of resignation accepted immediately by Canon Bracknell. Left within 48 hours. Too fast, said Whimsy. Too quiet. And no one's mentioned him. Constable Tegg shifted. Well, sir, there were whispers. Nothing official, you understand. Some said he was too friendly with the canon's niece. Niece? Miss Elspeth Bracknell. Came to live here last year. Quiet sort. Bit odd, if I may say. Took over helping with parish newsletters and bookkeeping. Smart as a tack, but what? Tegg shrugged. Had the look of someone who heard more than she ought. Whimsy steepled his fingers. A niece, a curate, and a biscuit tin. The start of an Edwardian farce, or a very English tragedy. He turned to Bunter. Make a note. We must speak with Miss Bracknell, and someone must go to Pickering's and inquire about the change in the canon's order. See if anyone else knew what was being sent, and have a word with the housekeeper. See if she noticed the canon eating fewer biscuits of late. Very good, my lord. And Tegg, when you found the canon, was the tin locked then? Aye, but the key? No sign of it. Whimsy turned, sharp now. Not on his person? Not in his pockets? No, my lord. We searched, yet someone must have had it. Either to lock the tin after death, or to take the key once it was locked. He looked again at the desk, then at the room, taking in the tidy arrangement. Nothing disturbed. No signs of struggle, no cup or saucer. Odd for a man settled with biscuits. "Where's the canon's tea service?" "Kitchen," Tegg said. Apparently he hadn't taken any that morning. "And no crumbs?" "No broken piece of biscuit?" "No, sir." Whimsy turned back to the tin. His hand hovered over it for a moment, then drew back. "I think," he said, "we shall wait before opening this. Let us first see what stories the housekeeper and the niece have to tell. One doesn't blaspheme against locked tins lightly." He turned to go and paused just inside the door. "Bunter?" "Yes, my lord." "Fetch me a macaroon from Pickering's." I wished to remind myself how much trouble a truly good one can cause, and he departed, trailing silence behind him as the canon's unsaid regret lingered in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. The air in the sitting room of Greythorn Hall was thick with the scent of damp wool and unspoken disquiet as Lord Peter Whimsy found himself once again facing Miss Elspeth Bracknell. She was seated primly by the window, a faint crease between her brows as if wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of parish accounting. Her pale hands were folded neatly on her lap, but there was an edge of nervous tension beneath her composed exterior. "Miss Bracknell," Whimsy began, settling into the high-backed chair opposite her, "thank you for seeing me on such short notice. It appears your uncle's sudden departure from this mortal coil has occasioned some questions." He allowed his gaze to rest lightly on the window's damp pane, as if inviting her to fill the silence. She swallowed. "Yes, Lord Peter. It has been difficult. The canon was my last remaining family, and his death has shaken the parish deeply." "Indeed," Whimsy murmured, pulling a well-worn notebook from his coat. "You have assisted him with the parish newsletters, I understand?" "Yes, and the bookkeeping." I was his eyes and ears in many respects, especially after Father Roundtree left. Her lips tightened. "Ah, yes, the curate's resignation. Quite sudden, I gather." Elspeth hesitated. "Yes, it was a shock to us all. No explanation was offered beyond vague personal reasons. And you, did you notice any tension between the two?" She looked down. There were disagreements. Father Roundtree was impatient with my uncle's methods. He thought Canon Bracknell too old-fashioned. Did the canon share this view? "A bit, yes. He was set in his ways, but he cared deeply for the parish." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Did Father Roundtree have access to the house?" "Of course. He lived in the curate's quarters just down the lane." "And Miss Frigg, the housekeeper?" "She is loyal to my uncle, but guarded. I don't think she liked Father Roundtree much either." "Why is that?" Whimsy asked, arching an eyebrow. Elspeth's eyes darkened slightly. There were rumors. Nothing spoken aloud, but Miss Frigg suspected Father Roundtree of inappropriate attentions toward the staff. Whimsy smiled thinly. "Ah, the eternal friction between clergy and domestic staff. A fertile ground for conflict." He jotted a note. "And did your uncle's habits change in recent weeks?" "You mentioned alterations in his biscuit orders." "Yes. He seemed preoccupied, distracted even. He ate less and often missed meals. Sometimes he worked late into the night, writing letters that began with the word regrettable," Whimsy said softly. "Did he confide in you at all?" "No, he was a private man. I only knew what I observed." Whimsy folded his notebook. "Miss Bracknell, one final question. Did you ever see your uncle with the key to his biscuit tin?" A faint blush rose in her cheeks. "I cannot say. I only know it was always kept locked. He was very particular about it." "Curious," Whimsy murmured. "Most peculiar indeed." Later, when Miss Bracknell had left the room, Whimsy beckoned Bunter. "Bunter, have you seen Miss Frigg yet?" Bunter nodded. "She's in the kitchen, my lord, busy supervising the servants." They found Miss Frigg in the scullery, her hands wrapped around a teacup stained with the marks of many afternoons. Her face was lined with years of silent service, and her eyes were sharp beneath the heavy lids. "Miss Frigg, I am Lord Peter Wimsey," he said with his customary polite gravity. "I wish to ask you a few questions regarding the late Canon Bracknell." The housekeeper nodded briskly. "I'm only too glad to help, my lord, if I can." The Canon was a good man, though set in his ways. "I understand the biscuit tin was locked at the time of discovery?" "Yes, sir." The Canon never let anyone near it except himself. "And who held the key?" She hesitated. "Only the Canon had it. I never saw it, and certainly not after his death." "Were you aware of any changes in the Canon's health or habits?" Miss Frigg glanced away briefly. "He looked tired of late. Worried, perhaps, but he never spoke of it." "Did you notice any visitors or unusual deliveries?" "There was the weekly parcel from Pickering's, as usual. But last week there was an extra box. More expensive biscuits, they said. Paid for in cash, not the usual account." "An anomaly?" "Very. I asked about it, but no one would say." Wimsey's eyes twinkled faintly. "A secret confection or a concealed communication?" "One never knows." She shifted, lowering her voice. "I must admit, my lord, there was something odd about the Canon's study door. It was soundproofed when I was young, but the lock has grown stiff. Sometimes it clicks shut of its own accord. Unusual." "Did anyone else have access to the study?" "No, sir. Only the Canon, yet the locked biscuit tin was found inside." "Yes, sir. And the key missing." Wimsey made a note. "Thank you, Miss Frigg. Your candor is much appreciated." Returning to the library, Wimsey took up the unopened biscuit tin once more, weighing it carefully. "Bunter," he said quietly, "do remind me to fetch the local baker at Pickering's as soon as possible." "Yes, my lord." Wimsey's thoughts circled the details, like hawks over carrion. A locked biscuit tin, a missing key, a resigned curate, a worried niece, and a housekeeper who knew more than she said. The Canon's regrettable letter left unfinished, and a soundproof door that might conceal more than dust. His fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair. The clues, first glance trivial, were beginning to gather coherence, threads weaving a tapestry of quiet desperation and hidden resentments. "Bunter," he said with a faint smile, "fetch me the parish register and the curate's letters." There may be more to Mr. Rowntree's resignation than a mere personal whim. Bunter nodded, already moving to comply. Wimsey stood, moving toward the window to watch the relentless drizzle obscure the moor beyond. "Greythorn Hall is a house of secrets," he mused aloud, "where biscuits are locked away and men die with unspoken regrets. And as always, it is the smallest detail that holds the greatest truth behind him. The biscuit tin sat silent and unyielding, an enigma wrapped in silver, waiting patiently to reveal its mysteries." The following morning found Lord Peter Wimsey in the cosy, cluttered back room of Pickering's bakery, where the scent of fresh dough mingled with a rich, lingering aroma of coffee. The baker, a stout man with flour-dusted hands and a friendly suspicion of outsiders, greeted Wimsey and Bunter with a cautious nod. "Mr. Wimsey, I take it." "Heard about the Canon's passing." "Sad business. The whole village is whispering." Wimsey inclined his head politely. "Indeed, Mr. Pickering. I trust you will forgive my intrusion. I'm curious about the recent orders placed under Canon Bracknell's name. I understand there was a marked change some weeks ago." The baker's brows furrowed as he wiped his hands on his apron. "Yes, that's right. Normally it's Eccles cakes, ginger thins, almond shortbread. Plain fare for a simple parish household. But 3 weeks back, orders suddenly shifted. Started sending up macaroons, chocolate-dipped Florentines, fancy stuff. Paid in cash, not charged to the usual account. We wondered what was going on, but didn't ask questions. Folks don't like their biscuit habits examined too closely." Wimsey smiled thinly. "No, indeed. A man's biscuit choice can be as revealing as a stained cuff. Who placed the order? Was it the canon himself? Same name on the ledger, Bracknell, of course. But the woman who came to collect the parcels changed. Not the housekeeper nor Miss Elspeth Bracknell. Different lady altogether. A woman. Aye. I recognized her face. She used to work here long ago before marrying and moving out of town. She looks anxious, if you ask me. Anxious and unknown. Curious, Whimsy's eyes twinkled. Did anyone else know of her visits? Only the shop assistants. She was careful, paid in cash, no chit. Came promptly after the parcels arrived, never loitered. Whimsy nodded, steepling his fingers. And the housekeeper? Did she mention this lady? Miss Frigg? She seemed uneasy when I asked. Said she never saw this visitor, and she doesn't like surprises. You know how housekeepers are, Bunter interjected quietly. My lord, I have procured the curate's correspondence. Shall we review them in the study? Excellent, Bunter. Let us not waste the morning. Back at Greythorn Hall, the two men settled before the neat bundle of letters, signed R. Rowntree. The pages revealed an increasingly fraught relationship between the curate and the canon. Early letters were deferential and hopeful. Later ones, terse and fraught with veiled complaints about unorthodox methods and unnecessary secrecy. One letter caught Whimsy's eye. Dear Canon Bracknell, I must express my concern over recent parish activities. Your refusal to share certain documents, your locking of the study door. It breeds suspicion and resentment among us. If there is something amiss, I urge transparency for the good of the flock. Whimsy murmured, a man caught between duty and doubt, his trust slowly. Eroding Bunter nodded. And the canon's reply? The response was chillingly curt. Mr. Rowntree, you misunderstand. Some matters are not for general knowledge. You will respect my discretion or resign. The parish cannot afford scandal. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Discretion or resignation? The choice was made. But why? What scandal might lurk behind the study's locked door? He glanced again at the biscuit tin, perched innocuously on the desk. And the mysterious woman collecting parcels. Someone the canon did not wish us to know about, perhaps? Later that day, Whimsy and Bunter spoke again with Miss Frigg, who was visibly more tense. That visitor from the bakery, Whimsy pressed gently. Did you ever see her? No, my lord. Only heard footsteps near the back door. Late at night sometimes. Late at night? Why would someone come so discreetly? Can't say. The canon kept his secrets close. But I do know he was afraid of something. Afraid enough to change his biscuits, it seemed Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Fear is a fine motivator. The conversation drifted, then settled on the soundproof door. Miss Frigg confided quietly that the lock was old and sometimes stuck, and that the canon kept the key on a chain around his neck. Now missing. Whimsy's mind worked methodically, connecting details like clockwork. The locked biscuit tin, the soundproof study door, the missing key, the anonymous visitor, and the curate's ill-fated departure, all threaded together by the canon's dread and secrecy. That evening, in the warm glow of the library fire, Whimsy arranged the evidence before him. Bunter, it seems our canon was hiding more than ecclesiastical debts. Bunter smiled knowingly. And the biscuit tin, my lord? Whimsy tapped it thoughtfully. Not yet opened. We must time our revelation carefully. As the night deepened, so did the shadows in Greythorn Hall. And beneath the polite veneer of country gentility, secrets waited, locked away like the biscuits themselves, waiting for the precise moment to crumble. The dawn mist clung to the moor as Lord Peter, Whimsy and Bunter made their way to the vicarage where Miss Elspeth Bracknell awaited. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of peat smoke, a faint chill creeping into the bones despite the promise of a slow, reluctant spring. The village had settled into its usual quiet, but beneath the surface, tension simmered like an undercurrent threatening to break free. Elspeth received them with a measured calm, though the dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed restless nights. Her neat sitting room was furnished with a modest grace, floral curtains slightly faded by years of sunlight, and a small, well-worn Bible resting on the side table. A kettle simmered gently, releasing curls of steam that mingled with the faint aroma of lavender polish. "I trust you slept well, Miss Bracknell," Wimsey began, his tone light but his gaze steady. "Not particularly, my lord," she admitted, stirring her tea. "There is much to consider. My uncle's death, the state of the parish, and now these troubling revelations." Wimsey inclined his head. "Indeed. I'm afraid the matter is more complex than a simple passing. Your uncle's private affairs seem to conceal threads that extend beyond the parish boundaries." Elspeth's hands tightened around her cup. "I wish I could be of more help, but I have lived in the shadow of Greythorn Hall for so long, I scarcely know where to begin. Perhaps we shall begin where the canon's own correspondence left off." Wimsey produced the curate's letters and laid them on the table. "I have been puzzling over these. They hint at a tension not merely professional, but personal." She glanced at the letters, her brow furrowing. Father Rowntree was a good man, but rather strict in his views. He disapproved of my uncle's reluctance to embrace modern parish methods. I suspect there was more to his resignation than he admitted. "Most intriguing," Wimsey murmured. "I'm also curious about the locked biscuit tin. It may seem a trivial detail, but such trifles often hold a key to deeper mysteries." Elspeth's gaze sharpened. "The biscuit tin. Your uncle was particular about it. Locked, with a key he always kept on his person, now missing. The tin was found unopened, yet the biscuits inside were stale, as though forgotten. I wonder if it served a purpose beyond mere confectionery." Elspeth considered this. There was always an air of secrecy around his study and that tin. "He was a man of peculiar habits." Wimsey leaned forward. "I believe the key lies not only in what was hidden, but why." A sudden knock interrupted them, and the door opened to reveal a young woman, her features faintly familiar, wearing the modest uniform of the local post office. "Miss Bracknell," she inquired, hesitating. "I was told you might want to see these." She extended an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in a shaky hand. Elspeth took it, fingers trembling slightly. "What is this?" "I found it among your uncle's effects in a locked drawer I was asked to open," the girl replied softly. "He never spoke of it." Wimsey took the letter carefully and broke the seal. The handwriting was ornate, the ink faded but legible. "My dearest Thomas, if ever you find these words, know that my love endures beyond shadow and time. The circumstances that separate us are fraught with peril, but I trust in your wisdom and courage. There are those who seek to undo us both, and you must guard the secret well. Forever yours, Margaret." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Margaret, a name not mentioned in any previous accounts. Elspeth's voice was barely a whisper. My uncle never spoke of any such person. Yet here lies proof of a concealed relationship. A correspondence that must have been dangerous to reveal. Bunter, who had been examining the room, approached quietly. "My lord, I noticed the clock in this room is 5 minutes slow." Odd for a place of such careful order, Wimsey's gaze shifted to the wall. "Indeed. An inconsistency in timekeeping often signals deeper discrepancies in alibis and narratives." Elspeth looked puzzled. "I hadn't noticed." "That is precisely the point. The small irregularities others overlook become the fulcrum upon which truth balances." As they spoke, Wimsey's thoughts returned to the anonymous woman who had visited Pickering's bakery to collect the special biscuit parcels. "Miss Bracknell, did your uncle maintain contact with anyone outside the village in recent months?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There were occasional letters from a London address, though their contents were never revealed to me. Whimsy's mind pieced together the fragments. A secret correspondence, an unknown woman named Margaret, the mysterious visitor to the bakery, the locked biscuit tin and the missing key. He rose abruptly. "Bunter, fetch the parish records and the canon's financial ledgers. There is more here than meets the eye, and I intend to unravel it." As the morning waned, Whimsy immersed himself in the ledgers, noting payments to unfamiliar accounts and unexplained withdrawals in cash. Patterns emerged of clandestine transactions coinciding with the dates of the unusual biscuit orders and the visits by the mysterious woman. "I believe," Whimsy mused aloud, "that the canon was funding a secret liaison, or perhaps protecting someone. The biscuits may have been a cover, a benign guise to conceal more delicate matters." Elspeth's eyes widened. Could it have been blackmail? Or worse? Possibly. But more likely, something of a deeply personal nature. A bond kept from prying eyes to preserve reputations and avoid scandal. That evening, as a grey dusk settled over Greythorn Hall, Whimsy and Bunter returned to the locked study door. The lock, now carefully examined, bore faint marks suggesting recent tampering. "Soundproofing and secrecy," Whimsy murmured. "A room designed to shield not only sound, but secrets." Bunter produced a small toolkit and with deft fingers manipulated the lock mechanism until a satisfying click echoed softly in the stillness. The door swung open, revealing a modest study, lined with books, scattered papers, and an old writing desk. The window was ajar, letting in the cold evening air, and the faint scent of lavender lingered. Whimsy's eyes scanned the room, pausing on a faintly stained blotter and a small empty pigeonhole in the desk. "Here is where the canon's mysteries take tangible form," he said quietly. Among the papers was a folded sheet marked with a London postmark, an unsigned note written in haste. "Trust no one but Margaret." The letter must not fall into the wrong hands. Whimsy's gaze met Bunter's. "We are nearing the heart of this puzzle, my good man. But the question remains, who would seek to harm the canon for what he guarded so carefully?" As the shadows deepened, Whimsy knew that the layers of deception were yet to be peeled back, and that the quiet village of Greythorn was far from the tranquil idyll it appeared to be. The biscuit tin was not the only thing locked tight in the canon's life. Behind every secret lay a motive, and behind every motive, a truth waiting to be uncovered. The candlelight flickered against the dark paneling of the study, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with secrets yet unsaid. Lord Peter Whimsy leaned over the desk, the folded note freshly unearthed from the canon's papers, clutched thoughtfully between his fingers. His gaze was steady, but his mind raced, tracing the contours of half-hidden truths and whispered intimacies. Bunter, methodical as ever, had been cataloguing the scattered documents, noting the neat penmanship of ledger entries and the occasional scrawl of anxious jottings. "My lord, I believe the financial transactions you mentioned bear closer scrutiny. The dates correspond suspiciously with those visits from the mysterious lady at Pickering's." "Precisely so, Bunter. It would seem the canon was providing for her discreetly, more than mere biscuits, though the confectionery may have served as a benign facade." Whimsy folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "But who is this Margaret? And what threat hovered over their liaison so persistently that the canon felt compelled to cloak it in such secrecy?" The quiet ticking of the clock was a metronome to their thoughts. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke the contemplative stillness. The housekeeper, Miss Frigg, entered hesitantly, clutching a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "My lord," she said softly, "I found these among the canon's belongings." They seemed important. Whimsy took the parcel, unwrapping it with gentle care. Inside lay a faded photograph and a crumpled letter, the ink nearly smudged by time. The photograph showed a young woman, delicate features framed by a veil of dark hair, her eyes holding a haunting melancholy. The letter was addressed simply to Thomas and read, "My dearest, if these days prove long and lonely, know that my heart remains steadfast. Our love, though forced apart by circumstance, is a beacon in the encroaching shadows. Should fate be unkind, promise me you will protect our secret from those who would see it destroyed. Yours, always." M. Whimsy's eyes lingered on the closing initial. Another cipher, Bunter. The letter and photograph confirmed the depth of this concealed relationship. Miss Frigg's voice trembled. "I never knew the canon had such a connection." "It explains the locked tin, the secrecy, the unease that settled over the house these past months." "Yes," Whimsy agreed. "A secret love affair, cloaked in shadow, but potent enough to dictate the canon's every move." He turned his attention to the window, now fully open to the chill evening air. "This open window may hold a clue." The canon was a cautious man. Why leave it ajar, especially with the soundproofing of this room? Bunter considered thoughtfully. Perhaps he sought ventilation after a distressing encounter. Or it was left so to signal a certain visitor. Whimsy nodded. "A signal, yes. The invisible thread connecting the canon to his unknown visitor." That night, as the village lay cloaked in silence, Whimsy and Bunter made their way to the village post office. The young woman who had delivered the letter was there, arranging parcels and correspondence with an efficiency that belied a nervous tension. "Miss Hargrove?" Whimsy greeted, his voice smooth and unobtrusive. "May I impose upon you for a moment's conversation?" She looked up, startled but composed. "Of course, Mr. Whimsy." "What can I do?" "We understand that you discovered a letter among the canon's effects, one addressed to a Thomas. Would you be willing to speak with us about it?" Her eyes flickered with hesitation. "I found the letter while sorting mail. It seemed private, and I wasn't sure if it was meant for the canon or someone else." Whimsy's expression was gentle but incisive. "Did you notice anything unusual about the correspondence the canon received? Any letters from someone named Margaret?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. Several came from London, always carefully concealed. The canon seemed to guard them jealously." "Did you ever see this Margaret in person?" Whimsy pressed. "No, but I've heard whispers among the villagers. Some say she was the canon's secret companion, others that she was connected to the family scandal years ago." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter. "A scandal, you say?" Miss Hargrove nodded, lowering her voice. "Yes, a tangled web involving the canon's late sister, a broken engagement and a vanished heirloom. An heirloom, I believe, with more than monetary value." This revelation deepened the labyrinth of mystery. Whimsy mused aloud. The biscuit tin, the locked study, the secret letters, all part of a protective shield over a hidden truth, perhaps an inheritance or a family secret with repercussions beyond Graythorne returning to Graythorne Hall. Whimsy paced the study, piecing together timelines and personalities. The curate's acrimony, the housekeeper's nervous glances, the post office girl's gossip, all wove together like threads of a finely spun tapestry. "Bunter," Whimsy said finally, "we must revisit the local solicitor who managed the canon's affairs. There may be documents or wills that cast light upon this shadowy history." The next morning, the solicitor's office was a cluttered sanctuary of legal tomes and yellowed parchments. Mr. Huxley, a man of rigid formality and keen eyes, greeted them with a mixture of suspicion and professional courtesy. "Mr. Whimsy, a pleasure, though I wish the circumstances were less grave." Whimsy wasted no time. "Mr. Huxley, I seek information on any recent amendments to Canon Bracknell's will, or documents relating to the late sister's estate." Huxley hesitated, then produced a worn file. "There was indeed a codicil added 3 months ago. It concerns a trust established for a beneficiary whose identity was to remain confidential, yet pivotal." Whimsy noted. May I see it? Huxley nodded. Here. But be warned, the contents are delicate. The codicil revealed the canon had altered his will to include a beneficiary, simply named M.B., with instructions for funds to be held in trust and the delivery of a particular family heirloom upon request. Aha, Whimsy murmured. Margaret Bracknell? The initial fits, and the heirloom, a missing piece that Miss Hargrove alluded to. Precisely, Huxley agreed. The heirloom is a brooch of considerable sentimental value, rumored to be the key to a long-standing family dispute. Whimsy's mind raced with possibilities. And the canon's fear? The threats implied in the letter, the locked biscuit tin? Blackmail or betrayal, Huxley suggested gravely. The village can be unforgiving when secrets emerge. As they left the solicitor's office, the sky darkened with the promise of rain. Whimsy turned to Bunter. We tread upon grounds thick with history, emotion, and danger. But every detail, the tin, the letters, the financial trails, edges us closer to the truth. Bunter smiled faintly. And the truth, my lord, often lies in the smallest of things. Whimsy's eyes gleamed with determination. Indeed, Bunter. The next step is to locate this elusive Margaret and understand the full scope of the canon's concealed world. In the gathering dusk, Greythorn held its breath, as if aware that the quiet village's facade was beginning to crack, revealing the tangled human dramas beneath. And at the heart of it, the locked biscuit tin waited patiently, a silent sentinel to secrets only the sharpest mind could unlock. The next morning, a thin drizzle muffled the sounds of Greythorn village, casting a grey pallor over cobbled lanes and slate rooftops. Lord Peter Whimsy, ever the picture of refined composure, adjusted his raincoat collar against the chill as he set out with Bunter toward the outskirts, where a name now frequently whispered in their inquiries awaited. Margaret Bracknell. It was a delicate pursuit, to seek out a woman who had long since stepped beyond the village's genteel surveillance, yet whose shadow lingered like a faded stain upon the canon's carefully ordered life. The address gleaned from the solicitor was modest, a neat terraced house tucked away on a narrow lane just beyond the village boundary. It was the sort of residence that might have been missed entirely, save for the careful precision with which the canon had arranged his affairs. Whimsy paused before the door, noting the worn brass knocker and the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the surrounding air, a detail he would not forget. A soft footfall from within, and the door opened to reveal a woman whose features were both striking and subdued. Margaret Bracknell was no longer the youthful figure of the photograph, but carried an elegance tempered by years of hardship and quiet resolve. Her eyes met Whimsy's with a guarded but not unkind expression. "Lord Peter Whimsy, I presume," she said, her voice steady yet tinged with an accent that bespoke education and refinement. "I had heard you might be calling. Please come in." The interior was modest but orderly, with bookshelves neatly arranged and a modest tea set steaming upon a small table. As they settled, Whimsy allowed himself a moment to study her with the subtle curiosity that had served him so well. The lines around her mouth bespoke unspoken grief, and her hands, folded demurely in her lap, bore the faintest tremor. "Miss Bracknell," Whimsy began with his usual courteous formality, "your correspondence with the late Canon Thomas Bracknell has come to light. It seems there are matters that require clarification, for the sake of truth and, I dare say, for your own peace." Margaret inclined her head, lips pressed in a faint, wistful smile. "I feared the past might emerge from its shadows eventually. Thomas was my brother, though many believed otherwise. Our family's history is tangled, and for years we kept our connection secret. Your letters speak of peril, of secrets guarded fiercely. Might you care to elucidate the nature of these threats?" Whimsy asked, folding his hands with deliberate patience. Margaret's gaze dropped to the teacup she held. There was more than mere social convention at stake. Our sister, Cecilia, vanished decades ago under circumstances never fully explained. The brooch, the heirloom you mentioned, is tied to that disappearance. Thomas discovered letters that suggested Cecilia had borne a child out of wedlock, a scandal the family sought to bury. Whimsy's brow furrowed. A hidden heir, then, potentially the beneficiary of the trust established by your brother. Precisely, Margaret replied. Thomas was determined to protect this child's legacy. But there were others, relatives, parish officials, who wished to keep the past buried, fearing ruin and disgrace. Bunter, quietly observing, noted the faint tremor of fear that crossed Margaret's face. Whimsy recognized it immediately. The calculated restraint of someone accustomed to concealing truth beneath layers of dignity. Miss Bracknell, did your brother receive threats? Or was the danger more insidious, perhaps arising from betrayal within these very walls? Whimsy's tone was gentle, yet precise. Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, letters, warnings veiled in courtesy but laced with menace. Thomas believed someone close sought to prevent him from revealing the truth. The locked biscuit tin was one of his last precautions. He kept the key with him always, perhaps as a safeguard for documents or tokens he deemed vital. Whimsy's mind flashed back to the tin itself, the faint scratch marks on its lid, the stale biscuits inside, the symbolic yet practical nature of such an object in a man's private arsenal. May I ask, Miss Bracknell, whether you have met with the villagers who now seem so eager to deny knowledge of these affairs? Whimsy inquired. Margaret's eyes darkened. The villagers are divided, some loyal to Thomas's memory, others fearful of upheaval. The curate, Rowntree, has his own designs, I believe. His resignation was not merely on account of parish disagreements, but also because he opposed Thomas's intent to expose the truth. Whimsy considered this carefully. This implies a motive both personal and ideological, one that might extend to more than mere words. Indeed, Margaret confirmed. And the disappearance of the key, without it, the tin remains sealed, and the secrets within remain locked away. The ticking of the clock marked the passage of their conversation, each detail weaving a tighter net around the unresolved enigma. As the interview drew to a close, Whimsy rose and bowed slightly. Miss Bracknell, your candor is most appreciated. I believe there is more to uncover, and your cooperation will be invaluable. Margaret inclined her head. I am at your disposal, my lord. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the air crisp and clear. Whimsy and Bunter made their way back through the village, the weight of newfound revelations settling between them like an invisible mantle. Bunter, Whimsy said quietly, the tangled web we have encountered grows ever more intricate. A family secret, concealed children, the missing key, all point to a carefully orchestrated silence. Do you suspect the recent visitor to Pickering's bakery is linked to Margaret? Bunter asked. Most certainly. I suspect she was the intermediary, perhaps delivering those special parcels under the guise of biscuits to avoid arousing suspicion. And the locked biscuit tin? A container for letters, perhaps heirlooms or evidence too dangerous to leave in plain sight. Their return to Greythorn Hall was met by Miss Frigg, who awaited them with a new piece of information. My lord, the curate's study was searched this morning by the local constable. He found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, containing a bundle of letters, some signed by Thomas, others by an unknown correspondent. Whimsy's interest piqued. May I see them? Miss Frigg nodded and produced the letters carefully. Whimsy examined the script, noting the alternating hands and urgent tone. These are the missing pieces of the puzzle, Whimsy murmured. They chronicle the struggle to safeguard the truth in the mounting pressure from those intent on silence. One letter in particular caught his eye, addressed to the canon and signed with the initials R.W. The contents spoke of warnings and veiled threats, urging caution and discretion. "Rowntree," Whimsy said aloud, "the curate's involvement is far from innocent." Bunter added, "And his resignation? Perhaps it was a calculated retreat, or a strategic move," Whimsy mused, "a gambit to obscure his hand." As the evening deepened, Whimsy resolved that the next step would be a confrontation with the curate himself, to unravel the final threads of this tightly woven deception. But even as he prepared, the specter of the locked biscuit tin and the missing key loomed, a reminder that sometimes the smallest object could unlock the darkest secrets. The truth was close now, buried beneath layers of fear, loyalty, and human frailty, waiting to be brought into the light. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the low hills surrounding Greythorn as Whimsy and Bunter set out to visit the Reverend Rowntree. The village, still draped in a shroud of quiet apprehension, seemed to hold its breath as if anticipating the revelations the day might bring. The curate's resignation had been abrupt, and his sudden disappearance from the parochial scene stirred an unsettling undercurrent beneath the otherwise placid surface of rural life. The modest rectory where Rowntree had resided sat at the end of a winding lane, its whitewashed walls faintly streaked with the residue of many rainy seasons. Whimsy noted with interest that the windows were shuttered, an odd precaution for a man reputed to have departed. A faint aroma of damp wood and fading incense lingered at the threshold, suggesting haste rather than permanence in the evacuation. They were admitted by a young housekeeper, nervous yet courteous, who informed them that the Reverend was at home but wished to avoid visitors. A brief exchange of words and the unmistakable authority of Lord Peter granted them passage, though they were led into the sitting room rather than the study. Rowntree himself emerged shortly, a man of middle age, tall and gaunt, with sharp features and eyes that flickered between defiance and calculation. He greeted Whimsy with a measured nod, acknowledging the detective's reputation with a trace of reluctant respect. "Lord Peter," he began, voice calm yet carrying an edge of suppressed agitation, "I trust your visit is of necessity?" "Indeed, Reverend," Whimsy replied, his tone polite but unwavering. "There are matters concerning the late Canon Bracknell that require your elucidation. Given your recent resignation and the discovery of those letters in your study, I believe your perspective is crucial." Rowntree's gaze hardened. The canon was a man of strong convictions. Our differences were, I confess, irreconcilable, but I am here to assist in the pursuit of truth, insofar as it does not unravel the fragile peace we have labored to maintain. Whimsy inclined his head. Peace built upon silence is a precarious foundation. Let us speak plainly. The letters indicate a conflict over a certain family secret. The disappearance of Cecilia Bracknell, the missing heir, and the trust held by your predecessor. The curate's eyes narrowed, shadows gathering beneath his brow. Yes, Cecilia's fate is a wound long concealed. The village whispers, but few dare confront the reality. I opposed the canon's insistence on exposing what many wished remained buried. There is a reason why some truths are better left unspoken. A noble sentiment, perhaps, Whimsy observed dryly, but one that may have crossed into obstruction. Tell me, Reverend, do you admit to removing the key to the biscuit tin, the one containing evidence your predecessor deemed vital? Rowntree's expression flickered, a brief crack in the veneer of composure. I took measures to prevent rash actions that could harm innocent lives. The key was removed for safekeeping, not destruction. Yet the tin remains locked, Whimsy pressed. Without the key, its contents are inaccessible, and the truth remains hidden. Your actions, Reverend, have delayed justice. Rowntree's voice dropped to a bitter whisper. Justice, yes, but at what cost? The child, if it indeed exists, would be thrust into turmoil, exposed to scandal and hardship. An understandable concern, Whimsy conceded, but concealment breeds suspicion and invites tragedy. The locked tin is a symbol of the stifling secrecy you sought to impose. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken regrets. Then Rowntree spoke again, softer, almost weary. "There is more, Lord Peter." The canon was not alone in his pursuit. Others in the village, men and women sworn to tradition, moved to protect the status quo. I feared their influence. "Such as," Whimsy prompted, leaning slightly forward. "The vicar, for one. Father Melrose. His allegiance was to the church's reputation above all else." When Thomas began pressing his inquiries, Father Melrose's patience waned. It is said the vicar once threatened to excommunicate him. Did Father Melrose have motive to silence Thomas? Whimsy inquired, eyes sharp. Possibly. But it is difficult to say who wielded true power. Greythorn is a web of loyalties and grudges, woven tightly over decades. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. And what of the supposed heir? Is there evidence that the child survived and was hidden? Rowntree hesitated. Only fragments, letters hinting at arrangements made by Cecilia's closest confidant, a woman named Mrs. Liddell, who was entrusted with the child's care. She vanished some years ago, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. "Mrs. Liddell?" Whimsy repeated, intrigued. "Her whereabouts unknown." "Precisely. And her disappearance is yet another thread in this tangled skein." At that moment, Bunter, who had been quietly observing, interjected. Might the mysterious visitor to Pickering's bakery be connected to Mrs. Liddell's fate? A messenger, perhaps? Rowntree considered. It is possible. The villagers are reluctant to speak openly, but such clandestine deliveries are not unheard of. Whimsy's mind raced, piecing together the subtle clues. The locked biscuit tin, the missing key, the letters, the absent Mrs. Liddell, and the layers of obfuscation practiced by those around the canon. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of suppressed truths and veiled threats. "Reverend," Whimsy said finally, rising, "your cooperation is appreciated. The path to resolution lies through honesty, no matter how painful." Rowntree met his gaze steadily. "I will aid your investigation, Lord Peter. For Thomas's sake, and for the sake of the child whose existence we all but forgot." As Whimsy and Bunter left the rectory, the clouds overhead began to part, shafts of sunlight piercing the lingering gloom. Yet the brightness was no less tempered by the knowledge that the road ahead promised more shadows to navigate. The next destination awaited, a visit to the once secret confidante, Mrs. Liddell's last known address, a derelict cottage on the edge of the village, shrouded in neglect and whispered rumors. There, perhaps, lay the final pieces of the story, waiting patiently beneath the dust and silence. Whimsy adjusted his hat against the emerging sun, the glint in his eye betraying an almost imperceptible smile. The game was far from over. Indeed, it was only just beginning. The cottage lay at the very fringe of Greythorn, where the neat rows of villagers' homes gave way to untamed brambles and the ragged edge of woodland. Its timbers sagged beneath years of weather, windows boarded but for one small pane clouded by grime and neglect. A faint, sour scent of decay clung about the threshold, mingling with the lingering tang of wood smoke that had long since died away. Whimsy paused, surveying the crumbling facade with an expression of mild distaste that masked his keen scrutiny. "A charming refuge for secrets," he murmured to Bunter, who trailed dutifully behind, his boots stirring up dry leaves in the overgrown garden. They knocked once, twice. No response. The silence was not surprising considering the house's forsaken reputation. Yet, as they prepared to retreat, a faint noise, a shuffling, tentative, rose from within. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt woman, her face pale and lined with years of hardship, eyes wary yet flickering with a spark of recognition. "Mrs. Harcourt?" Wimsey inquired gently. "I am Lord Peter Wimsey. May we come in?" The woman hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. The interior was dim, heavy with dust motes dancing in a shaft of afternoon light, filtering through tattered curtains. Sparse furnishings bore the marks of neglect, but the room held an air of vigilance, as though the occupant were guarding memories fiercely. "Mrs. Harcourt was Mrs. Liddell's name before," Wimsey said softly. "You knew Cecilia Bracknell's confidant?" A flicker of pain crossed her features. "Yes," she whispered. "I cared for the child after Cecilia, after everything." Wimsey seated himself with deliberate calm, producing a notebook. "We seek the truth about that child, Mrs. Harcourt. Your testimony may help us understand what transpired." She clasped her hands tightly. The child was a secret, yes. Hidden from the world because of shame, but also for protection. The canon believed she must never be found, at least not until it was safe. I was sworn to secrecy, but when Thomas Pickering began asking questions, the walls began to close in. "Thomas was the canon's nephew, correct?" The young man who met his untimely end. "Indeed," she nodded. "He was kind, but stubborn. He did not understand the weight of the past. Tell me about the child's fate. Where was she taken?" Mrs. Harcourt's eyes darted to the boarded window, then back. "After Cecilia's disappearance, I was entrusted with the child's care. For a time she stayed here, though I could not keep her forever. The village's eyes were too watchful." "Did you send her away?" Wimsey pressed. "Yes, to a distant relative, far from Greythorn, a cousin in Lancashire. She was safe there, away from prying eyes." "And did you maintain contact?" "No, I had no means. Letters were rare and dangerous, but I heard she was well." Wimsey's brow furrowed. "Do you possess any correspondence or proof of this arrangement?" The woman shook her head. "No. Those papers were lost long ago. The house was broken into after I left. I suspect someone wanted to ensure no trace remained." A sudden, subtle shift in Mrs. Harcourt's demeanor did not escape Wimsey's attention. A flicker of fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Who would do such a thing?" he inquired softly. She hesitated. "The vicar. Father Melrose. He disapproved of the secret and the upheaval it caused. He wanted the past buried." "Did you confront him?" "No, I feared his wrath." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully, making a note. "Thank you, Mrs. Harcourt. Your courage is appreciated." As they departed, the detective turned to Bunter. "A hidden child, severed ties, a man of the cloth who may have taken matters into his own hands. This adds a new dimension to our investigation." They returned to the village, the afternoon deepening into a somber gold. At the vicarage, Wimsey found Father Melrose in his study, a stark room lined with books and austere religious iconography. The vicar's demeanor was icy but composed, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he said, voice measured, "I understand you have questions about recent events." "I do," Wimsey replied, eyes narrowing slightly. "Your opposition to the canon's inquiries and the concealed child is noted. Would you care to clarify your position?" Father Melrose's gaze sharpened. "My duty is to protect the church and its flock. The revelations threatened to bring scandal and division. I acted to preserve order." "Order at the cost of justice?" Wimsey challenged gently. The vicar's mouth tightened. "Sometimes the greater good demands sacrifice. Sacrifice includes obstruction, even violence." Wimsey's tone was cool but firm. Melrose's eyes darkened momentarily. "I did what was necessary." Wimsey leaned forward, voice low. There is evidence suggesting you visited Mrs. Harcourt's cottage the night before Thomas Pickering's death. Can you explain?" The vicar's composure flickered, a shadow passing over his face. "I sought to dissuade her from further inquiries. I did not harm Thomas. Then who did?" Wimsey's question hung in the air like a challenge. Father Melrose said nothing, only stared, a flicker of desperation breaking through his clerical mask. Outside, Bunter remarked softly, "The vicar's resolve is formidable, but cracks are beginning to show." Wimsey nodded. "Indeed. The locked biscuit tin, the missing key, the hidden child, Mrs. Harcourt's testimony, and now the vicar's admitted interference, all threads woven into a complex tapestry. Yet the question remains," Bunter mused, "who silenced Thomas and why?" Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "Patience, Bunter. We are closing in on the heart of the matter. But first, there is one last detail that must be addressed, the peculiar behavior of the household clock at Greythorne Manor." As twilight deepened, they returned to the manor, where the clock, an imposing grandfather timepiece, stood sentinel in the hall. Wimsey's earlier observation about its misalignment suddenly assumed renewed significance. With quiet precision, he examined the mechanism, noting a slight irregularity in its chime. "The clock is 15 minutes fast," Wimsey murmured. "A subtle but deliberate alteration." "Who would have the knowledge to do such a thing?" Bunter asked. "Only someone intimately familiar with the household routines," Wimsey replied. "Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate time to construct an alibi or confuse an investigation." As the last echoes of the clock's chime faded, Wimsey's expression settled into the familiar mask of serene confidence. The pieces were assembling, each subtle clue a step closer to revealing the shadow lurking within. Greythorne's genteel facade. The night held its breath, waiting for the inevitable unveiling, and Lord Peter Wimsey was ready to confront the final act. The hall of Greythorne Manor was draped in shadows as Wimsey and Bunter re-entered, the dying glow of the hearth casting flickering patterns on the high ceilings. The grandfather clock stood silent but resolute, its pendulum paused mid-swing as if waiting for its master's signal. Wimsey's fingers traced the polished wood, following the subtle groove where the lock had been tampered with. "I suspect our perpetrator was adept at both mechanical precision and social mimicry," Wimsey murmured, eyes fixed on the clock face. "A man who manipulates time, and perhaps the truth, to suit his own purposes." Bunter, ever the practical, frowned slightly. "But my lord, tampering with a clock seems a trivial trick compared to the stakes here. Why such a contrivance?" "A question of psychology, Bunter," Wimsey replied, his voice dipping into that familiar arch tone, laced with sardonic amusement. "The manipulation of time, especially in a house governed by strict routine, acts as a small gesture of control, a means to assert dominion over the household and its secrets." He moved toward the library, where a modest fire still smoldered among a scatter of well-thumbed volumes. There, at a side table, lay the battered biscuit tin, now unlocked, its lid slightly ajar. Wimsey knelt and peered inside, revealing a jumble of letters, brittle and yellowed with age. "These letters," he said, carefully lifting the topmost, "belonged to none other than Cecilia Bracknell herself, addressed to someone named J. A lover, perhaps, or a confidant." Bunter leaned closer, squinting at the faded script. "They speak in riddles, mentions of fear, of shadows closing in, and a promise to keep the child safe, no matter the cost." Wimsey's lips twitched in a rare smile. Our earlier speculation gained substance. Cecilia's secret was no mere trifle, but a matter of life and death. He skimmed the letters rapidly, piecing together a timeline from the cryptic allusions. Cecilia had feared the canon's increasing paranoia, his suspicion that the past might unseat him. There was mention of a midnight meeting, a desperate attempt to protect her daughter from prying eyes. "Let us consider the night of the murder," Whimsy said, rising and beginning to pace. Thomas Pickering's death was officially recorded at approximately 11:15 p.m. Yet the clock in the hall would have chimed misleadingly, potentially placing witnesses and suspects off schedule. Bunter nodded thoughtfully. "And the locked biscuit tin?" "A symbol and a tool," Whimsy replied. The key, we learned, was hidden in the vicar's study, a place Father Melrose frequented under the guise of pastoral care, but evidently with darker intent. The tin contained the last tangible link to Cecilia's secret. His gaze sharpened. Melrose wished to eradicate all evidence. To destroy the past and bury it with the canon's reputation, the detective's mind then returned to Mrs. Harcourt's testimony and the revelation of the child sent away to Lancashire. We must ascertain whether that child truly exists, and if she might be the key to the entire mystery. The following morning brought little reprieve from the grey, unyielding skies. Whimsy and Bunter set out for Lancashire, where, according to Mrs. Harcourt, Cecilia's daughter had been sent long ago. The journey was uneventful, save for Whimsy's intermittent remarks on the oddity of the vicar's behaviour and the clock's peculiar timing. Upon arrival at a modest but well-kept cottage on the outskirts of a small town, they were met by a woman of striking presence, her dark eyes sharp yet warm. She introduced herself as Evelyn Bracknell, Cecilia's niece, and, as it soon became apparent, guardian to a young woman named Alice. Alice, shy but composed, greeted them with an air of quiet dignity. Whimsy observed her closely, noting a subtle resemblance to the late Cecilia, particularly in the delicate curve of her jaw and the thoughtful set of her eyes. After careful inquiry, Evelyn produced a worn, leather-bound diary belonging to Alice's mother. The entries confirmed the daughter's identity and detailed her upbringing away from Greythorn, sheltered from scandal and danger. "Do you know why your mother was hidden here?" Whimsy asked Alice gently. She nodded. "She feared the canon. She told me he could destroy anyone who threatened his position." The afternoon waned as Whimsy sifted through the diary, the pieces falling neatly into place. Cecilia's daughter had lived under assumed names, her existence carefully shielded from the village's gossip and the vicar's vigilance. Returning to Greythorn with this newfound knowledge, Whimsy summoned Father Melrose once more, this time in the presence of the local constable. The vicar's composure was brittle. The unspoken accusation in Whimsy's steady gaze left him unsettled. "Father Melrose," Whimsy began, "your efforts to conceal the truth, to manipulate time and destroy evidence, reveal a man desperate to maintain power. Yet the truth is like a shadow. It may be obscured, but never fully banished." He produced the diary and the letters from the biscuit tin. "You sought to control the narrative, but it is the human heart, with all its frailty and passion, that writes the final chapter." Melrose's face paled, his lips trembling. "You have no proof." "Proof?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "No, but a chain of logic, a web of human motives and the irrefutable facts of chronology." The vicar's eyes darted, caught between denial and despair. "It was necessary." "For order," Whimsy said softly, "or for fear?" The question lingered in the charged silence before Melrose, abruptly turned away, the walls closing in. The constable moved to place him under arrest. As the household gathered later that evening, the atmosphere was thick with tension and disbelief. Whimsy, ever the enigmatic figure, stood apart, cigar in hand, watching the faces. Some shocked, some relieved, others resigned. "Truth," he finally said, voice low and measured, "is the cruelest companion. Yet it is the only companion worth having." He paused, glancing toward the locked biscuit tin, now empty but no longer a mystery. And so, the child hidden away, the time manipulated, and the secret guarded with deadly resolve have at last been laid bare. The room was silent, the weight of revelation settling like dust upon the antique furnishings. Whimsy's eyes twinkled with dry irony as he turned toward the door. As Shakespeare reminds us, "The time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. But set it right we must." With that, Lord Peter Wimsey and Bunter departed into the cool night, leaving Greythorn to grapple with its ghosts and the fragile dawn of truth. The library at Greythorn Manor had regained its somber stillness, the kind that seems to settle when heavy truths have been laid bare. Lord Peter Wimsey stood near the window, looking out at the rain-slicked gardens, while the assembled household, the bereaved, the bewildered, and the implicated, gathered with an uneasy hush. Wimsey's fingers idly tapped the rim of his half-smoked cigar. The hour is late, yet it is time to untangle the final knot. He turned, gaze sweeping the room. You will recall earlier I remarked upon the curious manipulation of the grandfather clock and the locked biscuit tin, seemingly trivial devices, but in truth instruments of control and concealment. He advanced, each step deliberate. The canon, Reverend Malcolm Bracknell, possessed a reputation for unassailable authority, both ecclesiastical and domestic. Yet beneath this veneer lay a man gripped by paranoia and a merciless desire to silence those who threatened his standing. Wimsey paused, as if savoring the moment. Thomas Pickering, the unfortunate gardener, was not the victim of a sudden, mindless violence. No, his demise was carefully orchestrated. The clock's altered chimes provided a false alibi. The locked biscuit tin concealed letters which, if revealed, would unravel the canon's carefully constructed myth. The detective's eyes narrowed. Who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity? Father Melrose's desperate attempts to suppress evidence indicate his complicity, but he was not the hand that wielded the fatal blow. Rather, it was one who lived under the canon's shadow, yet seethed with a far more intimate grievance. A soft gasp came from the corner. Wimsey's glance fixed on Miss Euphemia Grey, the canon's niece, whose pale composure barely concealed a flicker of something deeper. "Miss Grey," Wimsey said, voice dry as parchment, "you inherited more than just the family estate. You inherited a secret. The knowledge of Cecilia's daughter, hidden away, cast out to preserve the canon's reputation. But you were no passive observer. Your jealousy, your resentment at being sidelined in favor of a phantom niece, fermented into a motive as cold and precise as any blade." She stiffened. "I did what I must to protect the family name." "Indeed. And in doing so, you exploited the household's rhythms, the servants' habits, even the clocks themselves, to manufacture a scene that pointed away from you. You locked the biscuit tin to hide the letters, tampered with the clock to confuse the timeline, and arranged for Pickering's death to silence a man too loyal to stand silent." The room was breathless. Euphemia's facade cracked. "You presume too much." "On the contrary," Wimsey said, producing a folded piece of paper. "This note, found tucked beneath the false bottom of the biscuit tin, is your confession. A hurried scrawl revealing your presence in the garden at the time of Pickering's death. The servant's testimony confirms your absence from the drawing-room when the clock chimed 11:15. Her gaze darted, defeated. "Justice," Wimsey concluded, "is not served by silence, nor by the illusion of order maintained through deceit. The child, Alice, is safe now, and the truth, once locked away like the biscuit tin, has been freed." As the constable moved forward, Euphemia's resistance faded into reluctant submission. Wimsey lit another cigar, the embers glowing like the faint hope in the stillness. Turning to Bunter, he remarked with that familiar, half-mocking tone, "Bunter, it seems that even the humblest of biscuit tins can hide the weightiest of secrets. One might say the devil is indeed in the details." The detective cast a final glance around the room, a faint smile curling his lips. And as the bard so elegantly put it, Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, or in this case, the hands that hold a biscuit tin. With that, Lord Peter Wimsey and Bunter departed Greythorn Manor, leaving behind a household forever altered, and a mystery laid to rest with the quiet dignity of unyielding logic.